Thanks everybody for joining today. I'm really excited to deliver the content we've got for you today, and hope we can make it as impactful as possible. Got a lot to cover, and this is the second year we've done this, and it's also the second annual Spooktacular NTD data publications webinar. We did it on the same day last year. So thank you for joining us again on this day. And this day being our notorious NTD reporting deadline as well, for those of you who are involved in annual reporting. I really appreciate the attendance. Some of you might be multitasking, juggling, submitting your report today. Hopefully that's not too stressful, and we'll have plenty of time, I think, remaining at the end here, so you can stick on if you do have more questions, or depart if you need to. But again, thanks for prioritizing today. I just want to start by kind of setting the expectation. This webinar is going to focus on public transit data collected via the NTD, which is administered by the Federal Transit Administration. We're going to describe when the data releases occur, where to look for the public transit data that you might be looking for or expecting, and provide a high level of descriptions of the types of data you can find. Again, we want to make sure this is as useful and effective for as many of you as possible. For that reason, what we're going to cover today might only scratch the surface, but hopefully we'll give a wide array of information about the types of data available. There's plenty we can do with the data once you know where it is. So on that note too, a few topics that we're not going to cover. We won't be actually doing a lot of interpretation or trend analysis on the data, or trying to identify all the downstream uses of the data. There unfortunately isn't time to cover all the data definitions or collection policies either, or provide a quality assessment. So for anyone looking for more information about those data collection policies or requirements, this is also a little plug for NTI. There are other webinars on NTI's YouTube site, and also linked from FTA's NTD website, which go into more depth there. And this webinar, the same webinar we presented at last year's annual data release, is also available on both of those pages. So with that being said, a lot of this, some of you who may have been here last year, some of this may be a little bit repetitive, but I am going to go a little quicker than last year through the kind of general overview, just to give us all more time at the end, for those of you who are repeat attendees, to get kind of more into working with the data and a demonstration. But here's the rough schedule, points we'll hit during. Again, encourage you, if you have questions, to pop them into the chat box. We'll go over a general overview of the publications, what they are, the release schedule, key terms, key types of data publication and the differences, and then the demonstration that I mentioned. So since I didn't a minute ago, I want to provide a quick introduction. My name is Joe Eldridge. I've been working with the NTD program in various capacities for about 12 years, and I've been in the transit industry for about 16. I manage the contractor team responsible for producing the NTD data publications, and I also work closely with the NTD program support team, which you can see the email here if you have any questions related to NTD reporting or data products that aren't answered today during the webinar. I encourage you to reach out to ntdhelp@dot.gov. You should receive a response within 1 business day for any questions submitted through that email address, and the office hours are 8 a.m. to 7 p.m. I am also joined today by Federal Transit Administration's NTD Program Manager, Chelsea Champlin, who is FTA's main point of contact overseeing this big operation and keeping the wheels of NTD turning, while also ensuring that the program is fulfilling its various legislative requirements. Also, we're joined by Joseph Gallagher, who's a transportation data analyst with FTA, providing major support and oversight for the release of maintenance of the NTD data publications. Thank you both, Chelsea and Joe, for being here today. And then we're also joined by Todd Schreckengoss, who's a team member of mine, senior team member involved in the production of many of the files that I'm going to be demoing. So we're also lucky to have Todd. Thanks for being here. If you have any technical questions, hopefully we can get them answered, again, using that Q&A feature. Todd, Chelsea, and Joe will be monitoring that throughout. All right, so just to provide a basic introduction, what are the NTD data publications? This will be brief. The NTD is the most comprehensive source of data regarding public transportation in the US. It's also a longitudinal data collection, meaning one goal is to keep requirements fairly consistent to allow for time series reporting. And we'll look at time series later on in the presentation. There have been and will continue to be changes to the data collected, but some of the core requirements have persevered, and some data points have been consistent all the way back into starting in the late 70s, which hopefully will help those of you involved in research. Of course, many of you might be more interested in more recent trends, for instance, involving ridership and recovery during and after the COVID-19 national public health emergency. So we definitely want to help you understand the years of data available, which will be specific to the publication. How is data collected? I'll be very brief on this as well. FTA collects this data through an online reporting application, which is hosted in Appian software. That's available to NTD reporters, transit agencies all over the country to fulfill the grant requirements that they may have for receiving certain types of FTA funding. So there is a requirement attached for some agencies to the grants they receive that compels reporting to NTD either annually or monthly, depending on their size. And then other transit agencies may submit their data voluntarily, but the second bullet here lays out that the rules regarding uniformity of data are designed to eliminate differences in interpretation of requirements for any transit agency reporting to the NTD, and therefore give us all a standardized data set to work with at the end of the day. So the data contained in the reports is reviewed by NTD validation analysts, and there's a closeout process that FTA will go through at the end of each annual reporting period as well. So we'll touch on that a little later. The goals of publishing data are listed here. I'm not going to go through every one of these, but really it's to help the transit industry, academia, the press, the public in general understand key aspects of public transportation. Many of these are very important research questions, can be further refined. So we won't try and attempt to answer them today. But again, for those of you involved, hopefully you're finding the data useful, and it's very important work that you're doing here to answer these questions. Please, if you have questions during this session, to this end, let us know how we can help you find the data you need or understand it better. And then finally, where is the data published? So there are two places where this NTD data, either monthly or annually collected, is being published. One is FTA's NTD website, which is transit.dot.gov/NTD. When you get there, there's a little left navigation bar with NTD data. You can click that and find the data you need, either through NTD data reports, transit agency profiles, the National Transit Summaries and Trends. Those are kind of the main three spots where you'll be able to access data depending on what you need among those three. And then the other place is the DOT Open Data Catalog, also available online at data.transportation.gov. This has been more recently utilized by the NTD program. We're in our second year now of publishing the annually reported data in data sets that are hosted on that platform. That's what we'll cover a little later, how to access both of those platforms and how to use the search tools available. The data release schedule. So this is a question of how often FTA releases NTD data, which, as it says here, is both on an annual and monthly data basis. the release frequency depends on the type. So to answer the basic question here, currently this is the release schedule. And I say currently because I don't know of any major change right now, but if there was one, it'd be messaged out through the website. But the frequency is going to depend on kind of the activities that are taking place reviewing this data after the fact. So the data submitted in annual reports is going to be released in the fall of the following reporting period. So that's why right now we're talking about the 2023 annual reporting data that has just been released to FTA's website. We're in fall of 2024 now. While for monthly and safety and security products, there are time series and other data sets that get refreshed every month. So again, FTA has published the annual 2023 data. Hopefully, if you're interested in that, you can find anything you need related to 2023 data on the two platforms I mentioned. We'll look at how to do that. The monthly ridership data is, again, shortly after it's submitted. So there is a deadline for the reporter types to submit that monthly data, and that is the end of the following month. So the end of the month following when the service was provided. So if I am New York City Transit providing my wide array of rail and bus services, I have my unlinked passenger trip and my vehicle revenue miles data, which comprise the monthly report. I have that ready to submit by today, October 31st, for the activities that took place in September. So there's a 1 month window. And then FTA is attempting to release that, and generally we have stayed on that schedule within a week of the submission of that data. So our target, for example, for the September data set release is November 6th. That's this coming week. That will append September's data submitted by transit agencies to the time series files we'll go over later. Safety and security data has a little bit more of a runway in terms of the release because there's a longer review window. There's also a different requirement here. What we're talking about when we say safety and security data, which we'll get into a little bit later, is specific event data. So a reportable safety event has occurred, and that's due within 30 days of the time of the event. So let's say it's a major collision with multiple injuries happening July 15th. The deadline for the transit agency on whose system this happened to submit the detailed report for that event would be August 15th. And then there's a 2-month review window, meaning October 15th is when that data could be completely reviewed and finalized. And then that would be included also in the set we're about to release in November. So generally, it's at least 3 months after the month of the event ends. Now, that's a little bit complicated, but hopefully you're following. So then the next month, we would publish out all reported events that happened up through August of 2024. That would be our next release. So July is the upcoming, and August thereafter. That might be enough to make your head spin, but you can think of it like it's not going to be any sooner than 3 months after the end of the month that the event occurred in. So this is a quick example for the annually reported data, just so we can think through this a little bit. So a transit agency submits its fiscal year 2023 annual report data to the NTD in April of 2024. That's the deadline for reporting. And then 4 months, so that's 4 months after its fiscal year ends. Then there's a validation and closeout cycle during the summer. There was one this past year. And finally, FTA develops and quality checks the data. So believe me when I say there's a lot of activity going on there between when the fiscal year ends and that quality check period and closeout. And then we have our publication window in the fall. So again, we're happy to be releasing the 2023 data. If you have a question, well, why does it involve that much time? There's very many, almost 3,000 reports to review over the course of the report year and afterwards. And so that's the time needed before its publication and to allow for that review period. Questions on that, I would encourage you to put in the chat, because again, I'm not going to dwell much on the release schedule. And I'll just make sure I'm going to check the Q&A. Sorry, I said the chat, but the Q&A. Check and make sure we don't have any so far.
I think we're good.
Okay. All right, so getting used to NTD terms, I'm going to use product type or publication type throughout, and what I'm talking about there is what is listed in the drop down. You can see that there are different types of products, whether they are data tables, time series, annual database files, monthly time series, or monthly safety time series. So talked about a couple of those already. The next slide will draw a distinction. And then a few more terms we'll go over quickly. So defining the general scope of data products here. So FTA publishes out these 4 product types. The first is the database files. This is an annual publication, which is like not as processed or less processed data from the NTD, intended for users who want to perform their own processing on the data, providing the maximum level of detail we can for a data set at the lowest level of reporting. So without any or much aggregation. So there's some transformations to things like names of fields to make them more transparent. But again, not much aggregation. So this requires more of an understanding of the caveats of reporting requirements. But to help you all who are using those database files, there is a database dictionary reference that goes along with this. And we're going to look at this as really critical if you're using those files. With the annual time series, it's quite the opposite. So this is aggregated data, which is totals by either by month or by year, as far back as achievable to allow for time series or trend analysis. Do we have a question? Sorry, I thought I heard someone come off mute.
No, I think we're good.
No problem. And then the time series really what we're talking about here, like this says, could be annual or monthly, but we're going to append the month or the year to the file again to allow for that series and trend analysis. So many of the annual files will contain data as far back as 1991. Many of the monthly files, monthly time series, will contain data as far back as 2002. And that's again a lot of data to work with in one file, but the level of aggregation is there for that reason. The database files and data tables, which I'll talk about next, can kind of be seen as supporting those time series, and there is like a crosswalk to kind of understand the data that appears in the time series versus the underlying files. If you notice any like differences that you're not expecting with aggregation. So I'll call that out later as well. The data sets are summary tables from each annual report year, and they are designed to present a more useful reference than the wider database files containing more detail. From 2022 to 23, these are available in the open data portal that I mentioned, where the further grouping analysis is made possible and more useful for those familiar with querying or visualization tools or who wish to access through an API. We're going to actually do a little bit of the querying and kind of data management at the end of the session. And then finally, there's the transit agency profiles. This is useful for peer grouping to understand the transit at a glance in a specific area. or carried out, conducted by a specific operator. So these are going to have transit agency metrics geared towards cost and service efficiency. They will provide visuals of that specific agency that are, charts going back over the last decade to track a trend. Those are available on the transit.dot.gov/NTD website, which you saw in the left navigation bar earlier. So there's one profile per NTD reporter per year. So I mentioned year a lot. Report year can either reference, as I've drawn attention to already, the fiscal year or the calendar year. And this distinction is important. In the monthly data publication, the year will always be the calendar year unless otherwise noted. In the annual data publications, report year instead reflects each transit agency reporter's fiscal year. The most common fiscal years are those ending at the end of September, at the end of December, and at the end of June. And in many of the database files, you will be able to see the fiscal year for the respective reporter. All right, agency name and details. So this is also going to be presented in the agency information database file. This is the legal name of the entity reporting to NTD according to how the name is recorded in sam.gov. So I'm calling that out because the NTD does use sam.gov data where it can, but the NTD also provides a new field, which you'll see in the agency information file this year, that's labeled division/department name. So if, for example, there is a Department of Transit within a city, you might see that the legal entity reporting is the city, while the division department may be Department of Transportation or Department of Transit. UZA, you'll see this acronym throughout many of the database files as well, and the time series stands for urbanized area and reflects the census urban area where the agency primarily operates, meaning attributes most of its service. And then finally, UACE is a code to identify that UZA across decennial censuses. Mode and type of service. So much of the data collected in the NTD is classified by mode and type of service. Mode in NTD lingo means system for carrying transit passengers described by right-of-way technology and operational features. So it's really what we're describing as the type of transit provided, whether it's heavy rail, rail transportation, or whether it's road running bus or bus rapid transit, for example. Type of service, meanwhile, describes how those services are provided by the transit agency, either directly or purchased. And then this is a key to understand those modes and types of service. So you'll see these acronyms, these two-letter acronyms in many of the files. This key is repeated at several points in the documentation, but I encourage you to use this as a quick reference. The modes are listed here. I think it's 18 in total. Types of service are listed on the right. Reporter type describes how much data will be available to each reporter, or from each reporter. So agencies that have a full reporter type operate more vehicles in maximum service and are the only reporters that submit the monthly data that appears in the monthly product types generally. The annual data publications guide, which we'll talk about in a moment, details the amount of data per type of data that's available from each reporter type. And it said the next slide, but apologies, I think it's a little further down. So we're now getting into a little bit more discussion on those types and their components. So for all files, we encourage you to leverage, if you see a README file, if you see an about page, leverage those to to get a better understanding of the limitations and definitions of the data. It can also help you understand the granularity of the data. You'll see on the open data platform, there's a landing page. We'll look at one later that has a definition for each field that appears. The database files do not have a built-in README file, and that's just for easy conversion to CSV, but they do have this database dictionary complement. This is going to provide the information about who reports in that final column. Any exceptions will be listed there for the specific data point. You can learn more about that. And then, of course, the definition. And if you're really interested, you can find the form, NTD reporting form on which the data point appears. Okay, so getting into annual data, this is where the data publications guide that I mentioned earlier is described. It's linked here. Our 2023 annual data publications guide is posted. The goal of this is to describe the database population for the year. It's to give you a sense of how to use each product type. So some of the information I'm going to cover today is repeated in there. And then, like I said earlier, to clarify differences in files containing similar data, like in the time series. So this is going to talk, this is a screenshot, an excerpt, for example, that's going to talk about why the time series might have different national totals for revenue per year than the underlying database files. It's just going to explain what, kind of data processing was done and what the purpose of the file is. I mentioned too that there's a crosswalk or matrix where you can understand what data is available from what reporter type. This is an example from 2023. So we see the agency information that is filled out by all reporter types in the NTD. But then from there, it gets different. If you look at each row, which reporter type is going to provide data that appears in which file. So this is meant to highlight that there are different types of agencies reporting to the NTD who have different involvement in public transportation. A full or reduced reporter is an operator generally of public transit, whereas a build or plan might be involved in either building a new system or provide planning and oversight for a current public transportation system. It could be in various stages of development. So kind of knowing what those types are can be useful depending on the analysis you're doing. Excuse me. All right. Excuse me 1 second. Okay, apologies. The annual database files are available from transit.dot.gov and can be found by selecting annual database in the product type and then the year that you're interested in the data product year. This is a quick filter. You can use this link at the bottom here, which will take you directly to the 2023 database files. As I said earlier, these contain all the annual data collected that has been approved for release. So not all the data will be summarized downstream in the data tables, but much of it will. And then these are exportable in Excel format. This is a cross section of the service database file, kind of to emphasize what I was overviewing earlier, that the level of aggregation is important, and kind of understanding what you're looking at in this file is a little bit more important than in the summarized data tables, because of that caveat of aggregation. So this is a perfect example where there's time period. Full reporters report some of their service data at a weekday service level, average weekday, but reduced reporters do not. But they're a blend of both in this file. So if you select the data in a column, you're going to sometimes get the average typical weekday and the annual total for a full reporter. So what you'd want to do if you're interested in only the annual total is use that time period filter. So again, reviewing and making sure you understand the level of aggregation, and generally we'll have mode and type of service wherever it's needed. And the panes frozen so that you can scroll back and forth and kind of keep your place in these database files. Okay, so kind of exciting development. Well, I think it's a very exciting development in 2023 is a new database file containing GTFS web links. So FTA began collecting from all fixed route operators, namely all bus and rail systems, the general transit feed specification files for their fixed route systems. Those are text files that can be mapped into geospatial analytical tools or GIS tools, and geographic information system tools that will show you where the transit fixed route goes, where the stops along that route are. So these are URLs that point to a location hosted by each transit agency, be it on their own agency website or some other hosting service where those GTFS zip files are included. This is serving to fulfill the requirement to collect geographic data on transit agency service by these fixed route operators, but is also an input now for the National Transit Map, which until this report year had relied on voluntary reporting from transit agencies. So now all fixed route reporters of the NTD will submit these files, which will hopefully result in a more complete and comprehensive national transit map, which is a product, as it says here, of the Bureau of Transportation Statistics. Encourage those of you who are interested to check out that map. A link to the new database file is provided at the bottom of that slide. There have also been substantial updates in 2023 to the reduced reporter safety information file. FTA expanded the data collection for reduced and rural reporters to meet the requirement for collecting data on assaults on transit workers and bus collisions. The reduced reporter safety information is an existing file that previously included counts of events, injuries, and fatalities. But the file now stratifies these event counts further into non-major and major events, and also counts the number of transit worker assaults by the type of worker assaulted, and also whether the assault was physical or non-physical. So this is a useful complement for any of you who are examining the trend in transit worker assaults on the national level and at an annual level, who want a bigger data set to use to understand the prevalence of these events. The monthly safety time series only contains full reporter data, so that time series will not contain this data, but again, this is the complement to it for those smaller systems. Anyone performing that type of task is encouraged to email the NTD help desk, and hopefully we can provide a more in-depth review of the data available and support that activity. Okay, so the database file documentation, I mentioned that there is a database file dictionary. There is also a file that contains questionable data items. So these are data points that might appear in one of the specific values that might appear in one of the database files or data tables, which FTA has deemed questionable or for which a reporting requirement was waived. You may want to filter this data out depending on the context of the analysis you're doing. And again, this questionable data items file identifies the transit agency, the NTD ID associated with that agency, and the data point. Okay, so we get now to annual data tables. We've covered the annual database files. This is data contained, summarized and aggregated, as I mentioned above, and this is the list of data sets that are now available that perform that summary. So data.transportation.gov hosting began on this site rather than on the NTD transit.dot.gov site in 2022. We'll have a demo at the end of this session to take a look. But the key difference we want to point out that's relevant for those of you who may be using this file this year is that it now contains 2 report years worth of data. And I think the plan is to continue to append each new report year's data onto the existing data set. So that means one consideration when you're using these data sets is that you need to filter to a certain year. So if you're looking at just a single report here, that's going to be very important. You don't want to accidentally include 2022 and 23 if you're just looking at one or the other. But you can easily filter within the interface, as we'll show, using queries off the API, or you can do it post-processing in Excel. We also gave users a starting point from the transit.dot.gov website. So you can find the data table, and we'll show how to do this from the transit.dot.gov website. There will be a link to pull up just that specific year's worth of data from the open data portal or to download it. That might save you the trouble from having to pull up the query interface and typing in the year. One benefit, as I just mentioned, of the open data format in the Socrata open data platform is the API. And they call that the Socrata Open Data API. There's some guidance here for those of you who are consuming the data that way, using data processing tools downstream like Python or R. There's a nice developer portal here, plenty to learn about if you are accessing data that way. The program does try and keep field names consistent from year to year to make this type of querying and accessing easier. Okay, so new data tables. These are new data sets on that open data platform that have just been added this cycle. So for report year 2023 are the GTFS web links, which I just mentioned is the same data that's in the database file. Then a complement to that geographic data collection for demand response operators is going to be organized into three data sets: counties and places, service schedules, passenger eligibility, and fares. So this will be data on demand response geographic coverage to understand the census places and counties in which transit demand response service is provided. Since there isn't a general transit feed specification standard for those modes. That's the format the data was collected in. And then finally, the facility inventory. So this is an existing database file which has been added to the open data portal to allow for mapping of facility data and other analysis on transit facility, including condition assessment. Along with these data sets are what we're calling data summaries. So narrative and visual summaries of each of these data sets. Those are available on data.transportation.gov through related content. We'll find how to get to each one of these. And it's included to allow for a little bit more interactivity. So learning more about certain topics of interest. In the example we've got here, we've got older vehicle fleets, which comes from the vehicles data set and allows for some analysis or for some visualization by vehicle type and agency to understand what vehicle types are, what vehicle types and which agencies are operating newer versus older vehicles. Okay, and then we'll talk when we get into the demonstration about filtering as well, but at the top of each of these summaries, you'll see filters, and you'll be able to use these filters to basically control what information shows up in those visual summaries. So we would encourage you to play around with these, let us know how they're working, but to also take caution when you're using these filters at the top. make sure to understand that they will be applied to the exhibits in the summaries below. Each of those visual summaries will also let you export the data associated with them and view the source data. So you know exactly what data set they're coming from and can export it. And if you even want to try and reproduce it, to do that. And you can do that as a summarized export, or you can get the data at the granular level that it's presented. Okay, I went through that quickly, but like I said, it will come back to the data tables. The annual time series data is summarized by agency, which is synonymous with system. You'll see that term in the time series sometimes, or by mode. And the key data points per category are summarized in these time series. Rural reporters are also included in the time series when feasible, but rural reporting did not start until 2007. So that is a caveat to be aware of. And when you're comparing urban full reporting and urban reduced reporting with rural reporting, that may affect, at that point in time, may affect trend analysis. A quick link to get to the time series, which are 6 files in total, is at the bottom. And finally, we get to annual transit agency profiles. As I mentioned, contain a profile presenting key data points for individual transit agencies. Exists for all reporter types, reporting expense and or service data to the NTD. So this is an example of a profile. Again, you can see that the operating funding sources, capital funding sources are here. It's a little hard to see all the information, but there is plenty. It's separated into general information about the agency, annual total service consumption, modal characteristics, so by mode, how much service was provided and consumed, and then operational characteristics, including service efficiency and effectiveness. And as I mentioned earlier, there are line graphs to kind of track those effectiveness and efficiency metrics through time. The National Transit Summaries and Trends document is a special report which presents and summarizes transit data in an easy to read format. So it's comparable to the summaries that we mentioned, but will have more narrative and will tie the trends that we're seeing to specific strategic objectives as well. It presents trends in key transit metrics over the last 11 report years. Okay, so a list of 2023 improvements, as I mentioned, the addition of the geospatial data, stratified and reduced reporter safety data, appending of the 2023 data onto the 2022 tables for easier year-over-year analysis. I mentioned the division department names to add detail about the entity, and then additional summaries, including the national map of transit facilities. That's kind of just a summary of what we reviewed, but also important to highlight these changes from the prior cycle. We'll talk briefly now about monthly ridership data. As I mentioned, there are monthly ridership time series. There are 2 different time series. One is designed to present only the submitted monthly ridership without any adjustment or estimates. And another is to provide a more complete data set and estimate, when possible, the service data that is missing from the data set recently, either due to delinquent reporting or some other complication. That is also normalizing certain agency modes and types of service over time to allow for smoother analysis when there was a major data collection change within that agency that impacted totals. And so that's the difference. And those specific agencies affected in the complete monthly ridership file are described in the README tab. This is a snapshot from the monthly ridership time series. As you can see, the columns are, each column here is a month worth of service data. And again, complete monthly ridership time series fills in missing data and back adjust when major changes in data collection methodology have occurred. There is a summary tab included, which is useful if you are looking at an annual level. In the monthly ridership data, as I mentioned earlier, the year is generally calendar year. The summary tab measures here will call attention to any differences where we are summarizing instead along the fiscal year. Okay, safety and security data. The safety and security data sets contain both totals for safety and security events and event level details. You can find them by filtering the product type here to monthly safety time series. As I mentioned here, the functions of the safety and security event details. So this is the event by event level data sets, and there are two of these, one for major and one for non-major safety events, is to provide all detail available. This is providing the basis for understanding the counts in the time series, but also allowing for deeper analysis, including fields like date, location, weather, hazard type for a major safety event. And there are some detail as well, although it is more aggregated data for non-major safety events. The next safety data product is hosted on the Open Data Portal, which is the monthly modal time series. This aggregates safety data on a monthly level and can be aggregated up to the yearly level if needed, but it's designed for month-over-month trend analysis on a greater number of fields than the safety time series, which we'll look at in a moment. This also combines non-major and major events with very little transformation, which is a key difference from the other safety time series we'll look at. It's intended for users familiar with the reporting caveats and seeking data for trend analysis. It's also intended to present that combination of non-major and major assaults on transit workers, and is the file to reference moving forward if you're looking for that level of aggregation across major and non-major events involving transit workers. The threshold adjusted time series, in contrast, aims to create a static data set for the total safety events that accounts for historical reporting changes, namely the ones you see listed here. There were changes to reporting that would otherwise skew the metrics and trend analysis due to major inflation or deflation of those events after the change occurred. So, for example, in 2011, the removal of security events like fare evasion counts will reduce the overall major event count reported. This time series handles that by excluding all security events, non-major security events, including fare evasion counts from 2002 through 2010. And there are similar transformations listed here. This comes directly from the README file, the threshold adjusted safety time series. And again, the function is to provide a consistent look at data, simulate if the reporting requirements had been consistent through time. The major safety events time series only counts major events, which require the more detailed reporting. It provides a basis for understanding events which FTA defines as more severe, and can create value for those of you involved in understanding safety events which are further evaluated by state safety oversight agencies. Finally, this is the event summary by year. This is a tab within the document, like we saw in the monthly ridership time series, that normalizes the count of events by rates. And for example, per 100 million vehicle revenue miles here. There were several improvements we made to these monthly publications over the course of calendar year 2024 that we want to highlight. First is that the validated safety data is released sooner. 2023 final data set was also available sooner, so the data published now for 2023 is considered final. The reference week for reporting data is now released monthly, so this is a sample of transit agencies who report 1 week of service data per month, and that can be useful for earlier monthly estimate generation. And finally, there's improved redaction in the event descriptions in the major safety events data set. Okay, so that brings us to the end of the overview of the data products and now to the demonstration, which I see we've got about 35 minutes left. I want to take a moment here. First of all, just to highlight, there are some additional resources if you have lingering questions. Our contact information is also at the end of the slide deck here. But I will pause too to see if we have questions that can or should be answered before we move on to the demonstration. Anything in the chat, Lori, that is outstanding?
There's one. Uh, Actually, it's for me. So I just saw it. I'm sorry. Uh, yeah. There's nothing you need to answer. I will answer the questions that were DM'd to me in the chat.
Okay. And I do see a couple in Q&A. We'll try and get to those in Q&A as well. Okay.
Okay.
All right, great. So I'm going to switch gears and I will move to our demonstration. So I had a few prompts there and, we can take as long as we need with these. I'll try and monitor the chat. So stop me if there is a specific question or if I move too fast with the demonstration. Happy to slow down a little bit. We do have time. And screen share is not cooperating. Give me one moment. Let's try this. Hopefully now I'm sharing a web browser window.
Yes, but it's a Excel file.
Okay, great. That's
Okay.
where
Oh, okay.
I wanted to start. So our first prompt here is to find passenger miles traveled. And it doesn't specify which year, but it does say for a specific mode and for a specific transit agency. So we're going to say the year is for 2023. Now, passenger miles traveled is one of those data points that unfortunately isn't collected on a monthly basis. So once you know that, you can infer we are talking about annual data. So if I can go to the NTD website, I want to start with NTD data here and NTD data reports. And then there's a couple different products that are going to contain passenger miles traveled. I look in the database dictionary, I can see that one of those products is for 2023 is the service database file. So a few ways I can get to that. I can either type in service data here and refine the search a little bit, or I can even just type in passenger miles traveled directly. And travel is one of those words. I can never remember if it's two L's, but we'll see if I'm lucky. Okay, so there's the service database file. And if I click on that, it'll take me to this page. It'll describe what the file is. It'll have the database dictionary file linked here. So kind of a quick reference. And then I can pull this up. So this pulled up in my tab here. I'm using Edge, depending on what browser you're using, it might, and what your settings are, it might also automatically download that Excel file. But this is good enough for now. So I then will look in the column headers here and I can see passenger miles. So if I can pick one transit agency at random, I'll just pick a number at random here. Let's try, maybe I shouldn't try it at random. Actually, what I should do is I should filter first to full reporter. Because I also know from reviewing the database file dictionary that full reporters are the only ones submitting passenger miles travel data. And then for the time period, I'm also interested in, just for now, the annual total. So why don't I select now at random here, 00040, Central Puget Sound Regional Transit Authority, Sound Transit. So I can find Sound Transit's passenger miles traveled now by navigating over to this column. And there we have it. So this is the passenger miles traveled on each mode and type of service provided. And notice here that Sound Transit has both directly operated and purchased commuter bus CV service. So if I'm interested in the total commuter bus, there's my number there. If I'm interested in commuter rail instead, I can find that by looking at the data associated with just purchased transportation for light rail, just directly operated here. So that's one way to get to these service data, which is again like a very popular request. A lot of the service consumed, service provided data, regarding ridership, miles traveled, will be in this file. But this is, as we saw, the one with the lowest level of aggregation, the most detail. So I might also want to go to a data table. And I can search the data tables here, and hopefully I'll find the service data table. And I see service and metrics. And these links will take me out of transit.dot.gov and into the open data portal. So I see now that I could either look by mode and type of service, which is what I said I wanted, or I could just do by mode, rather than with the time period included as well, or by agency. So I'm going to try by mode, and that will take me out to the view of this data, which is at the by mode level rather than time period. So this is just going to have annual total data for the mode. Now it's a little bit overwhelming when I get here because I do have a lot of the same detail, although not as much of it is in the service database file. But I have an option right away down here at the bottom to cut down on the number of columns that I'm looking at. So I can deselect, and let's just say I just want to look at NTD ID, agency, and then I can type in passenger miles traveled. That's going to make this, let's type the whole thing in, a little easier to look at because there will be fewer columns. And so if I want to filter further, like I did in the Excel interface, I can go over here and I can click the plus icon. And then there's another way to do the same thing I did, picking one of these IDs at random, which we found out was Sound Transit. So I'm going to search for Sound Transit here. And I got the grand annual total for the year, which is a combination of all modes. Now, if I wanted to add mode back in, I'd go back over here and oops, would actually need to. Oh, and I'm realizing the mistake I made now is I clicked service by agency. So I'm actually not getting mode here, but that's because I must have clicked on the wrong file. Clicking on the other one would have this same detail, but again, mode in the drop down. So I have a couple options here too. I'm signed in as a data user, and those of you who have accounts, which I think you can register through login.gov, might be able to do the same thing where you can actually save this view. But if you don't want to do that, you just want to export from here, you can do that too. You can download a CSV for Excel, a number of other formats here, including RSS or XML, or you can get an API endpoint. So saving this endpoint will allow you to actually just pop this in the URL and come back to it anytime. Now it will download a CSV file when you go to that endpoint, but it can be useful for saving your place, and you don't actually need an account in order to do that. I'm going to pause here after our first prompt and just scan for any questions on what I just went through. And Joe, Todd, or Chelsea, let me know if you have any. I think we have any that we really need to cover. I see Chelsea is typing in an answer on the requirement to report PMT, which is more one of those data collection questions, and that we probably won't be able to go through in much detail, but it is an important distinction to draw here, that passenger miles traveled is one of those data points that's only available for a larger reporter, 30 or more vehicles in maximum service. Now we'll look at another one in a second that's more ubiquitous, which is vehicle revenue miles. I'm going to go ahead and jump to that because I think looks like all other questions have been answered in the Q&A.
Yeah, I'm working on the last one.
All right, thank you, Lori. So we want to now find the national total 2023 vehicle revenue miles and unlinked passenger trips. So for all NTD reporters who reported that data. And we want to do that using two different methods as well. So this is where those summary data sets can really come in handy. So that's a commonly requested data point. Again, we can get to it this same way. We've got sound transit here, but we can get rid of the NTD ID in this filter, apply that, and what we'll be showing here, this is still for passenger miles traveled, but oops, and we'll deselect NTD ID. Once we do that, we should be showing the annual total. Oh, no, we shouldn't yet, because what we need to do is group and aggregate. Apologies, I missed this step. So if we want to just group the national total, what we can do here is just select report year. And we will then aggregate a certain column that we're interested in. So let's do vehicle revenue miles. So to do that, we need to actually go back. So I'm going to discard. Order is important here. So let's do vehicle revenue miles, which is called vehicle passenger car revenue miles. Now, if I really want to understand what I'm looking at, like I'm practicing what I was preaching earlier, I want to go back to the overview and make sure I really understand what it is that this is telling me. So I'll do that at the end. I'll go back and look at the definition. But okay, we've added revenue miles. Let's go ahead and now aggregate along year, let's go ahead and aggregate up the actual vehicle passenger car revenue miles. Now, here is giving us a few options of how to actually form that aggregation. We want to do a sum. A sum across all the rows is going to give us the grand total of all the agency's service data. So I'm going to apply that now, and hopefully instead of seeing one row for each agency, I'm now just seeing 2023 and one figure for the national total. Okay, so that's one way to do it. And again, as I mentioned, the data summaries can come in handy here. So from the related content of a data set, let's see if we can go back to that one. Sorry, wrong one. We're going to go back to the overview of this one. And actually, we want to go to the underlying data set. And then from there, we should do related content. So this is the by mode and time period, the lower level data set that's supporting aggregation up to the agency level, which we were just looking at. And then also this is going to include 2023 summary. So I can click this, and this is going to have done the work for me, where I've got this nice table right at the beginning where it's mode is already here if I'm interested in that level, or I have a grand total. And if I'm looking at revenue miles, there's the same number I just saw, 4.34 billion. And then there's a little bit of narrative too, just confirming that miles traveled by all vehicles in revenue service, which is what that's describing, was 4.34 billion. And it has the same thing for unlinked passenger trips. It has the same thing for total miles traveled by all riders. The passenger miles traveled we were just looking at, that's 35 billion. So you can get to those a little quicker just by going to the summary. There's also this where we can look at passenger trips by mode. We mentioned there's are some of these where you can even drill in. So if I want to just look at commuter rail operators and understand their ridership for the 2023 report year, I can understand that by drilling in this way. And so that there are going to be several of these. And again, how I got there, just to kind of reiterate, from the source data set was to go to related content. You can also use the search feature. So if I'm looking for those summaries, I can type in NTD summary. And maybe I just want to limit to 2023. And those annual summaries are going to be available, all of them at the top of my search here. I can also choose what I'm looking for. So if I want to be sure I'm looking for something that's recently added, we just recently added all of these summaries. And there's some data sets as well. So this is a good way to find all of the NTD data. Use some keywords in the search here, and then you'll find various other summaries that are doing the same thing. All right, that was the second demo. I'm going to look again at the Q&A. For some reason, I'm having trouble pulling up the Q&A. Apologies. All right, not seeing any new ones. So we'll move on to the last demo. which is to compare metrics for commuter rail and heavy rail modes. So as you might be seeing on my screen now, there is a data set called metrics. So this is again an attempt to take the work out of using those underlying database files to get some commonly requested measures. And these are things like passengers per revenue hour, fare recovery ratio, cost of transit service per hour. So right in this summary up front, we're presented with just what we want to see those modes here. So CR being commuter rail and HR being heavy rail. We're able to make that comparison pretty quickly between the metrics associated with each. As it says here, we can even go further than that. Maybe we just want to look for a group of agencies. We can do that at the top using that agency filter that I mentioned earlier. So, say I want to look at, I'm just picking at random here. I don't know if these are really peers or not, but we can go and, we'll see that what's left in this table is only when one of those agencies appears. So there we have light rail, we have MTA Maryland and Houston Metro, both light rail operators. We can compare the measures associated with those light rail systems using this table this way. Again, you can filter if it's something you're interested in at a higher level, but in terms of like operation, but more locally in terms of the area you're interested, you can go over here. So say I'm interested just in operators in LA. I want to use UZA name, or another way to do the same thing would be to use the city. And then I can see a LA exclusive set of reporters in this table now. There are many other things we can do with these data sets. Again, I would encourage you to look starting at the NTD transit.dot.gov page and kind of work your way over to this open data portal. But if you have any questions, like I'm expecting this one data set, but not finding it, please let us know. And we're happy. We've got 15 minutes or just shy of that to take some more questions. So, Lori, I'll pass the mic back to you at this point.
Okay.
But if questions, we're happy to stick on and answer live.